Hi guys, I'm Elisa and I'm back with another video. Today is time to do a video that I've thought about doing since the beginning of the year, and that is my fantasy recommendations. I have been on BookTube for 3 years now and I still haven't done a fantasy recommendations video, and I consider myself a booktuber that reads quite a lot of fantasy, so I feel like that is a little bit strange. I wasn't sure if I was going to be doing the video in just one big video where I talk about both adult, young adult and middle grade fantasy authors and books and stuff. But if I want to include all of the authors and that I really love, I think I have to do it in 2 videos. I'm going to do a version where I talk about adult fantasy and a version where I talk about middle grade and young adult fantasy, so as to separate them a little bit. I know if you are a recurring viewer on my channel, there's probably a couple of authors you know that will be here, but I also think there's going to be a couple that's going to be surprising. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. I like fantasy and today I'm talking about them. Let's get into the fantasy series that I have enjoyed and want to recommend to you to try out. The first thing I'm going to talk about is a book that I have been working on over the past half a year. I am attempting to finishing the whole thing this year, and that is the Amber Chronicles by Zelazny. With the exception of the 4th book, I have really enjoyed all of the books that I've read so far, and I've read the first 5. It starts out really strong with 9 Princesses in Amber. Now, to talk quickly about this one, it follows Cohen. When we start this series, we are thrown into it because Cohen doesn't know who he is. He has amnesia. He doesn't know anything. He wakes up in a hospital and has no clue about who he is. And so we follow him. We're in his mindset all the time, so we're following things in his speed. And as he's seeing things and figuring things out, and it's a really good way of writing it, I guess. And we are thrown into this world of Amber, which is a fantasy world that is sort of a shade, and you can travel between the earth and this place, sort of, I don't know if you call it portal fantasy or something like that. Cohen and has 8 other brothers who are all princes in Amber, and they're all fighting to become the leader of this place. Their father has disappeared and they believe him to be dead, and a brother called Eric has taken over the throne, and he's definitely not friends with Corwin, that's for sure. And so it's really interesting for trying to figure out Cohen's thought processes as he's trying to figure out what's going on and who to trust. And you don't really know who to trust because he doesn't know who to trust, and sometimes he trusts the wrong people, and it's a really interesting type of story. And the good thing about all of these books is that they're fairly short as well, so it's easy to get through them. They are about 170 to 210 pages each. That's the ratio they go, and I have definitely been enjoying them. They are from the 70s, so they're a bit old and some places are a little bit dated, but I still really recommend it and enjoy it, and I think it's a fun series to read if you want a little bit of a fun adventure. The next author or series I'm going to talk about is the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin. This is obviously a really popular series, both on BookTube but in general because of the TV show. I have not watched all of the TV show, and I didn't get into it because of the TV show. I got into it because of the books, and I'm happy about that because I do feel like the books are better than the TV show. I much prefer them over the TV shows of what I've watched. I've watched the first 3 seasons so far, and yeah, I think that they mess a little bit with the characters that I know from the book. And yeah, my favorite book in the series was the 3rd one, Storm of Swords, but I finished actually this series this year, back in February, after having read the first 3 books quite back in 2015 or something. And then I had a long break where I didn't read anything from this series until November last year, when I finally picked it up again and read A Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons. And as I said, Storm of Swords is my favorite, but I also really enjoyed Dance with Dragons and the first one, Game of Thrones. I think Game of Thrones is a really good book because it introduces you really well to the series and to the characters and to the world, and I think that George R.R. Martin has a a writing style that's fairly easy to get into. It's not extremely difficult, and he has a lot of characters to get a hold of, and I think that was my main issue when I started it. It took me a couple of about 150 pages before I had a hold of all of the characters that we were introduced to, but I still think that they were all really well developed, and they definitely mostly had a purpose, all of them, that you're introduced to. So enjoy it for that. If you thought about picking up the books and haven't watched the series for some reason, which I feel like no one's in that group any longer, then also consider it, because it follows this, if you like political intrigue and lots of characters and messed up families, then I think this will be a series you'd really come to enjoy. The next author I'm going to talk about is definitely an underrated author to me. I think she's should have more publicity around than she already has, and that is Elif McNeill, who writes the World of Linaria series. I don't have a physical copy of the last one yet, but I'm definitely intending to get my hands on one. This is an epic fantasy series, I think high fantasy at least. This is the first book, Marauder, and it's a self-published author. This book, Marauder, follows a group of characters who come together to try to fight Aciel. Aciel is very powerful, has a lot of magic, like quite tropey in that sense of a villain, but he is definitely doing things for the wrong reasons. Marauder, along with her sister Erin, joins a group of other characters. Amongst them are Mora, Palom, Cole, and all of these other people who come together to fight Aciel and stop this war that is coming. It's a world where you have the traditional fantasy tropes of dragons and the sort of, the usual fantasy setting, but it also has sky pirates and shape changes, and you have these Aurelian people who are winged people. So a lot of different type of characters and species that are a little bit different than your average fantasy character as well. So I really enjoyed that it has that, and I think Marauder is almost come to a sort of conclusion on its own, but still leaves some things you want to figure out what's going to happen in the next book, because she definitely takes it places that I didn't expect her to do in the first place. And then Palom follows the characters that they've been separated from the group, and so they are going in different direction for different purposes, and just following them along after what happened in the first one. Lots of them are feeling guilt, a lot of them have lost someone, and they are angry, they are sad, and trying to figure out what to do to try and amend things a little bit. So yeah, definitely recommend this series, this author. She writes really interesting fantasy. It definitely comes better for me with every book, and I think they are very much deserving of a read if you are interested. The next author is a fairly popular author on YouTube that I have been reading. I have not read all of his books, not by any means, but I've read 3 of his fantasy books and two of his young adult books, and that is Brandon Sanderson. These 3 books are all adult fantasy, and I really have been enjoying them. The first thing I read by him was obviously Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, and this is another book that I think you could read on its own and actually have an almost full story, because it has a lot of ties in the end that could have been the conclusion. But it is a trilogy where they follow a lot of the same characters, and yeah, definitely enjoyed both of these. I still have to read Hero of Ages, but it's on my to-read list soon. Hopefully before this year is over, I'll finish the series. But I have really been enjoying it. I think Brandon Sanderson is one of those authors that has the most accessible writing style. If you are new to adult fantasy, this is definitely a good place to start, because it's so easy getting into his books, and he has a lot of characters. He has a really unique magic system that can be a little bit difficult to comprehend sometimes, because they're so different than what you're used to. but his writing makes it easy to get into it, because without thinking too much, you've already read like 100 pages, and while these are really long books, they're still really easy to get through. I also read Warbringer, which is it's not a standalone because there's supposed to come more books, but this also reads mostly like a standalone, with the exception that there's a little bit of a twist towards the end that makes it for that suggests that it could have been a second book coming. But this was released as one of the first Brandon Sanderson books, so quite a while ago. But this one, I started out not really into it. I think I was about the 300 page mark before I really got invested in this one, but after having finished it and when I think more about it, it's definitely because I've become more and more fond of this. So I think it's a really good book nonetheless, and I know some has this as one of their favorites at Brandon Sanderson, so I think it's definitely worth a read if you're interested, and if you want to read Brandon Sanderson but you're not sure if you want to dive into his longer running series, then I think this is a good place to start. This one and Elantris is both as so far standalones mostly, but yeah, this one or Mistborn is the place where I'd suggest you start with Brandon Sanderson. The next author I'm gonna talk about is an author I discovered last year, and that is John Gwynne, who has written the Faithful and the Fallen series. I've so far only read the first 2 books, but I have really been enjoying both. And this series is a 4-book long series, but then there's a spin-off series that is called something else that I've forgotten. But he's just released the second book this year. Anyway, I have read the first 2 books obviously, and it is, I'd say, if you like Game of Thrones, an epic fantasy sort of thing, I think you might like this one. It has a lot of different characters, it has a lot of political intrigue, and it has some interesting creatures, and it has a wolf that's very reminiscent of the wolves from a Storm of Ice and Fire series. So if you like that, then I think you might enjoy them. But I do really enjoy these books, and I can't wait to read the next one. I don't know when I'll pick it up, but hopefully I'll pick it up soon. I haven't wrapped them up actually, so I could read the next one over this year if I want to, so we'll see what ends up happening. But as I said, love these 2. This one was 5 stars, this was 4.5 stars, and yeah, definitely very, very intrigued to see what's gonna happen next, because if I remember correctly, it ends with a bit of a cliffhanger. So yeah. The next author I'm gonna talk about today is N.K. Jemisin, who writes the Broken Earth trilogy. She also has written some other books, but I'm going to talk about the Broken Earth trilogy because that's the only things that I've read. It starts out with the 5th season, Obelisk Gate, and finally the Stone Sky. And I'd say what you have to be aware of when you go into this, because I wasn't completely into this when I first started it, but that is, this series has a second person narrative, and if that's something that throws you off, I think it's something that you need to consider before going into it, because I definitely struggled a little bit with that. However, by the second book, or by the end of this and through the second book, I really got used to that, and I really got invested in the characters and what was going on. This is a sort of a genre bender type of fantasy, because it's not only fantasy, but it's also very, the magic system relies heavily on science fiction elements or Earth and what happens and with climate changes and stuff. And so for that, it is really, really interesting. And this is not for everyone, but I think it's something that would be awesome if everyone tried to check out, because it's so interesting and so different than all of the other fantasies I've read. And so for that reason, it should definitely get a mention. And I'm definitely looking forward to possibly try and reread it maybe next year, because I got these books because I wanted to reread them after having listened to the audios. I think maybe the second person narrative is easier to get if you're not listening to a narrator speaking to you. I don't know if that is true, but I'm definitely going to try and see if I can't do that. The first one for me was a 3.5 stars, the second one was 4.5 stars, and the third one was a 5 stars. So I definitely think that this one improves as the books goes, and the characters are so wonderful and diverse, and if you're looking for diverse adult fantasy, this is the series you should try to check out for sure. Another fantasy author that is quite popular on BookTube. I read it way before I started BookTube. I read it before I feel like it was even a thing and that people were talking about it. And that is Patrick Rothfuss' Kingkiller Chronicles. I'm still anxiously waiting for the third book, which I think I'm in the same boat as many others having done for a while. I first read the first book, The Name of the Wind, back in 2014 when I just started into my real reading binge. And I hadn't really read adult fantasy before when I read that. I think it's actually, again, a good bridge from young adult fantasy into adult fantasy, because the character we're following is actually, when we meet him, he is in a middle grade age type of person, and then he goes through university and all of that, but the writing style and the grittiness is probably a little bit more in the adult fantasy part, even though the books were actually in the children's fantasy section at my library. I don't think that's how it's shelved on Goodreads though, so let's put it in adult fantasy for now. I love this series because alchemy is one of my favorite magic systems ever, and this magic system is built on alchemy. I love alchemy magic systems a lot, and our main character is I like unreliable narrators, and Quoth, our main character, is definitely that, because he is telling his own story and you don't know how much he's changed to his benefits, and but as I said, we are following him in different passages of his life as he's telling in his story. In the first one, we are meeting him and he's telling this chronicler about his life in the different stages of his life. So the first one is a lot about how his childhood, and then getting to the university and getting through that, and the second one is much about the life at the university and stuff that happens there. And I guess the last one is what happens. Oh, he's more of an adult life before he sort of went in hiding in this inn. The next author I'm going to talk about, another one I don't have any physical copies of, and that is Marc Lawrence. Marc Lawrence writes both The Broken Empire and the Book of the Ancestor. I've read 2 books from both series, and they were definitely very different, but I do really enjoy both. I prefer the Book of the Ancestor series, but I still think the other series is really good. I think you should check out Marc Lawrence if you like gritty fantasy. If you think messed up characters is your thing, then definitely Broken Empire is what you should read, because York is quite messed up. You're seeing things from his perspective, and he's definitely an anti-hero. I don't even think you can call him an anti-hero, he's just a bad person in a lot of ways, but it's so fascinating being in his mindset, and for that I really enjoyed it. The Book of the Ancestor is so interesting with the world building, how it's set up, and with our characters. I think that there's so much going on in this world that I love, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the last one, Holy Sister. Grey Sister is my favorite Marc Lawrence so far, and so definitely recommend Marc Lawrence if you like a little more gritty fantasy, a little darker fantasy than your average high fantasy. Now we're getting into my favorite authors on this list. I mean, I've loved all of them, the authors that I've talked about so far, but these are the top of the tier, if you will. Let's start out with Robin Hobb, my favorite, my queen of fantasy. I've just finished Fool's Quest by Robin Hobb, which is the second to last Realm of the Elderling book, and I loved it to bits. I've read 14 books by Robin Hobb, and she is one of my absolute favorite authors of all time now. You obviously have to start, in my opinion, you have to start with the Varsity trilogy, because even though it's not at all the best series that Robin Hobb has written ever, it is definitely the starting of this whole thing. And if you want to get all of the things, all of the feelings, and all of the references when you read the books, then definitely read these in the chronological Elderling order. I will leave a link in the description box below with a Goodreads link to the series order, so you can find out where to start, where to go next, and all of that, because I hear a lot of people telling me they don't know where to go when they finish the Farseer trilogy, or where to start for that matter. But yeah, the Farseer trilogy follows Fitz. Fitz is a bastard and of the king in waiting chivalry. He decides to abdicate the throne when he finds out that he has Fitz. Fitz is, as I said, is the bastard, and so instead the king in waiting will become Verity. Fitz comes to the king's town to become an apprentice, an assassin's apprentice, and is slowly getting to know how to work as an assassin and get to know his skills, because he has 2 different magical abilities. One is very, very frowned upon, and one of the others is a thing that only the royalties in this world has, and that is the skill, and it's sort of a psychological thing where you can manipulate a little bit with their perceptions. There's a lot to it, but then the other thing that he can do is that he has the wit, which is where he can relate to other animals. He has a specific animal he's more relatable to than others, so he can talk to them, he can actually become this animal. And that is very frowned upon, because people don't really like the fact that people can become animals. There's something very, very bad about it. So how does he hide the one thing that he can't show everyone else? And yeah, it's just really epic. Robin Hobb takes a real good time in creating the characters, in setting the scenes, in setting the mood. And by the time we start with Fitz, he is 6 years old. And by the time where I am now, he's in the 50s, I think. So you see, it's a long time gap where we're following the same character. Yes, we have the trilogies in between, where we're following, for instance, the Life Ship Traders, we follow a completely different setting. Also, the Rain Royals is the same setting as the Life Ship Traders. But still, there are references in all of the series to Fitz and the other one, and characters show up in the different trilogies. So you definitely, if you want all of the references, read them in order. I love Robin Hobb. Definitely check her out. It's quieter fantasy, it's more descriptive than the general. But if you want to read a book where you get invested in all of the characters, inclusive all of the side characters and the minimal characters, every character gets its time. And yeah, I don't know how to say it, but she definitely takes her time building all of the characters. You're not introduced to a character without you knowing how they look, how they are, and what they can do, and she's developing them even though they're just a minor character in it all. And that's what makes her such a phenomenal author to me. The last and final author on my list is probably not surprising to you if you've been on my channel for a while, but that is Terry Pratchett. This is the books that I have, the physical books that I own that I've already read. Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I think you should all start in the Discworld order. I am very much a believer that you should go the chronological order of the Discworld. But if you are uncertain about that and you've heard about other people doing things differently and you want to start with something else, you can definitely do that, because none of the books are really tied together. They're its own stories, it has its own conclusions. But I definitely think it's fun to read it in the chronological order. That way you can dip in and out of the different sub-series all the time, so you always have some fresh characters and you don't always have the same characters to follow all the time. But if you want to start some places that is not the start, then I have 4 books that are my favorites that I've read so far, that I've all given 5 stars to. The first book that I really got me to love Terry Pratchett is Maud. Maud is the first book in the Death sub-series. It follows Maud. Maud is a young boy who is looking for an apprenticeship and not really sure what he could do, because he is a little bit unfortunate and not really good at very many things. But Death decides he can be his apprentice, so he becomes the Death apprentice. And it's definitely an interesting story, and you get to see things behind the scenes of what Death, the Reaper Man, is doing. And I really enjoyed it. I think this is actually a good book if you're a middle grader as well. I think because Maud is such a young character, and Terry Pratchett is awesome with his humor. The next I have is Guards by Terry Pratchett. This is the first book in the City Watch series, which I absolutely adored as well. It is set in the Ankh-Morpork and is following the City Watch in Ankh-Morpork, and as they're trying to fight the evil in this city. In this one, there are dragons on the loose, and I loved it. Then I have the second book in the Death series called Reaper Man, and Reaper Man is probably my favorite Discworld of all time so far, and it follows Death as he is actually fired from his job as Death. So it's sort of the transition period in the time when there's no one around doing the job as the Reaper Man does. What is going on, what is happening to the people who are supposed to die but who can't die because there's no one to do his job. And it also obviously follows Death as he's trying to figure out what he's going to do when he can't beat Death. Death was fired from his job because he was had a little too much of a personality. And it's hilarious and morbid in times, but I loved it. And the last and final book that I have that I gave 5 stars to is Men at Arms, also by Terry Pratchett, and this is also a City Watch book. So I think so far my favorite sub-series has been the Death series and the City Watch series, so definitely if you're interested in starting somewhere else, you could start with either of these, and definitely I think you will enjoy them. The good thing about Terry Pratchett's book is they're always really short. I highly recommend the audios if you could get a hand of the ones by Nigel Planer. I think he's a really good narrator of these, and you get really used to his way of the voices he has for the different characters. I adore the Witches series as well, which starts out with Equal Rights. I don't own the copy of that. It got lost in the mail. I'm still really bitter about that, but I loved it and I will definitely highly recommend it. I hope this video didn't become way too long. I have a tendency to talk a little bit too much, but I did talk about 10 different authors today. I should have maybe narrowed it down, but I couldn't. I wanted to mention all of these authors because they've had a really strong impact on myself as a reader, and so I wanted to mention them in this video. So let me know in the comments down below if you are a fantasy reader and what your favorite fantasy books are. I'm always intrigued to get new recommendations. Maybe I haven't read them, maybe I've only read one book. I have also decided today that I only wanted to mention books that I've read more than one book by an author. So there are definitely authors I've read something from that is not on this list that I really enjoy so far, but I've only read the one book. Let me know in the comments down below, if you have any recommendations to me, and tell me your favorite fantasies. Have you read any of the books that I've been talking about, and what are your thoughts on them? And if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next video very soon. Goodbye!